Hello, my name is Olivia Mattis. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program on the remarkable Benjamin Ferencz. Today is D-Day, and we are celebrating somebody who was there on D-Day and whose life's work is in many ways a reaction to his experience of that day. So what more appropriate subject could we have today than Ben Ferencz? The Sousa Mendes Foundation honors a hero, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, who in 1940 rescued thousands of people who were escaping the Nazi onslaught. He was a Portuguese diplomat in Bordeaux, France, and he allowed people to escape France by giving them visas to Portugal. And he did this against the direct orders of his government, and he was punished as a result. So we honor this man of courage, this man of conscience. And for the past year, we've been presenting all kinds of beautiful stories of rescue and resistance to honor the spirit that animated Sousa Mendes. Today, we are featuring an interview by Dr. Yael Danieli of Benjamin Ferencz. Dr. Danieli and I met with Ben Ferencz when back in April, when we were planning today's program. And we met with him and explained that this was a planning meeting. And he said, "What do you mean a planning meeting? I'm 102, I'm wearing a tie, press record." So we in fact did record the interview that you will be seeing today. It's about 30 minutes in length, just under. Dr. Danieli will introduce the interview, and then she will be happy to take your questions after the interview. So please be sure to formulate questions and put them into the chat box. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Danieli. Dr. Yael Danieli is a clinical psychologist, a victimologist, and a pioneer traumatologist. She is the founder of the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma, and her center is co-presenting today's program. She is the founder and director of the Group Project for Holocaust Survivors and Their Children, which was founded back in the mid-1970s. And she's an expert on reparative justice. She is the one who coined the very important term, the conspiracy of silence, that we use in the Holocaust remembrance community to talk about how survivors didn't speak about their experiences and they were never asked about their experiences. That's called the conspiracy of silence. So Dr. Danieli, welcome.
Thank you. I had the privilege and unexpected joy to meet Ben and Gertrude in 1979, 42 years ago, when Ben's seminal book, one of many, Less Than Slaves, came out. And I was trying to gobble up anything I could put my hands or eyes on to learn anything I could about survivors and their lives immediately and after World War II. And during the establishment of the Group Project for Holocaust Survivors and Their Children. When I met Ben, trying to understand the conspiracy of silence, I met one of the most generous people I ever have, always available for kibitzing, for the most serious issues, for the most difficult issues. He reviewed the first book I did for the UN. Not once did I not receive a reply to an email or to a call back. Ben is always thoughtful and always humbling. When you finish a conversation with him, you always have the feeling, of course he thought about that. Quite astonishing after so many years. So it was totally natural when we created the International Center for the Study, Prevention, and Treatment of Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma that I invited Ben to serve on its honorary board. Similarly, it was totally natural when Olivia and I were discussing future programs with the admirable Susan Mendes Foundation that I suggested inviting Ben, another hero of the great generation, to shine his light on some of the lessons he learned from that period. I hope you enjoyed the interview I had with him as much as I enjoyed doing it. So you've worked and gave a lot of thought and given a lot of thought and spoken to anyone who would listen, teaching, you're a lobbyist par excellence, about the crime of aggression. Why do you think the crime of aggression is so important?
Aggression is a broad term which has never been adequately defined.
Mm-hmm.
It was an excuse, a loophole left open when the United Nations Charter was drawn up. Nations agreed not to use arms against each other in the commission of aggression. And the question was raised, well, how do you define aggression? That's correct. And they never defined it. And the reason they never defined it was they didn't want to define it. They wanted to be able to commit aggression whenever they chose to do it. But I took them up on it and I said, let's define aggression. So I spent years lecturing on aggression, what it should be. I wrote a 2-volume book defining international aggression. And of course, that was systematically ignored. The whole thing was a fluke. You put that in. If you don't have any war, you don't have to define aggression. So they played with various definitions. I went to the UN, I lectured to them there, and they came up with what they called a consensus definition of aggression, which just frankly, between the two of us, is no definition because it's full of loopholes. If you don't want to be covered by it, you say, I don't accept it. I want to withdraw from the agreement and so on. So it's a phony excuse put forward primarily, I'm ashamed to say, by the United States in an effort to keep a big loophole so they could do whatever they damn well pleased when they went to war.
And when did you start? When were you gripped by this need to define aggression? Was it related to the Einsatzgruppen trial?
I'll tell you when it began. I was a combat soldier in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I had difficulty getting into military service because of my height. The Air Force wouldn't take me. They said I couldn't reach the pedals. The paratroopers wouldn't take me. They said I would go up instead of down. I finally ended in, via the dress, an honor graduate of the Harvard Law School. The Army, recognizing that talent, made me a plain, ordinary private in the artillery. And in that capacity, I landed on the beaches of Normandy. I went through the Maginot Line. I went through the Siegfried Line. I crossed the Rhine, driving a Jeep across the river on a pontoon bridge. I was there for the final Battle of the Bulge, for which I was very well, handsomely rewarded by the United States government. I was promoted to sergeant somewhere along the way and given 5 battle stars for not having been killed or wounded during the war. But the real answer to your question is not merely my experiences during the war. That was horrible enough. Yeah. The landings and things of that kind. I was there, but I was assigned by the Army eventually to set up war crimes programs. They had no idea what a war crime was. And so they told me do whatever I had to do in order to comply with the Pentagon's order to begin to set up war crimes trials. That took me, of necessity, into the concentration camps as they were being liberated. Nobody else has got that kind of experience. I came into the camps, the inmates were dying and dead, lying on the floor. The floor was covered with bodies. The crematoria was still going. They were lined up like cordwood, bones, bags of bones, just skinny people waiting to be burned. The stench in the air, the SS fleeing, inmates chasing them with some of them could, the inmates killing the guards when they could, burn them alive. I've seen that too. So I've seen all of the horrors of war. And that, of course, had an impact on my, as you have had an impact on your war experiences. I decided there's got to be a better way. We have to stop war making. Now, I realize that war has been glorified for centuries.
Mhm.
For me to say, hey, you shouldn't be glorifying it, you should be condemning it. There's never been a war without rape of women, for example. I saw it in Berlin when the Russians got there. They raped everything in sight. That was the reward for war. So war is a horrible thing. It's not a glorious thing. It's not something we hold up our flag, we are victorious. Nobody wins in a war. Everybody loses in a war. And so that awareness on my part, based upon not only my logic, it was clear to me that if you took the money you spent on armaments and you took care of the poor who are starving or who are looking for a job, if you use the money to save human lives instead of to kill human lives, it would be a much more rational thing to do. But we do the opposite. We're not content to have a nuclear bomb. We want a cyberspace bomb. A cyberspace bomb, well, that will cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. That'll kill you all. Are they crazy? The answer is yes, they're crazy. They think I'm crazy. Well, maybe they're right to believe that I can change the world, but I know I can try. And that's the answer to your question. I'm trying to end war making because it's no longer feasible. It's no longer harmless. It will kill everybody. And all the young people who are listening to me, I am now 102 years old. I have been, when I was 27 years old, I was chief prosecutor against the murder squads that murdered over 1 million people, including thousands of children, because they didn't share the religion and the ideology of their executioners. They were Jews, or they were other enemies of the Reich. So I've been through all that. And that is, of course, the trauma which drives me and has been driving me for 50 years and more to try to change it. My lead defendant, Dr. Otto Ollendorf, mind you, is very well educated. I selected my defendants based upon their education and their rank. I had generals and some with double doctor degrees, which I'd never heard of before. He explained to me why they did this. He said Hitler told them that the Russians were planning to attack. And so in self-defense, it was necessary for them to preempt that attack and be the first to attack them before they got to you. Yeah. And that was what they were doing. And that was perfectly lawful, according to the German experts. P.S. When the past president, Mr. Trump, made his first appearance before the United Nations, he made it a point to say, I'm talking now to the head of North Korea. If you threaten us or our allies, we will totally destroy you. And I'm listening to this on television. And I'm saying, what are you saying, Mr. President? You're going to go and attack a country with which we are not at war and totally destroy them for a theory that we have legal capacity to do that, that's murder. That's mass murder. That's what I hanged Ollendorf for. The judges said that's no defense, that you expect to be attacked at some future date or even that a nearby date. That's no defense. And the President of the United States was using that as potential defense. And I was ashamed. And I felt a bit guilty about having been invited to the hanging of Ollendorf, who was a father of 5 children and intelligent man, and who was reasonably honest on the trial. So this is a complicated matter. And I think I'm driven by trauma, knowing that the goal I seek to reach will not be reached in my lifetime, simply because it has been glorified for centuries, and we cannot reverse that in the course of one human life. But we are making progress. We can make progress. We must make progress, or this planet will no longer exist. Planet Earth is in danger. I wrote a little book called Planethood. The whole idea of the whole book was that you can no longer talk in terms of nationhood, my country, right or wrong, or neighborhood. You have to think in terms of planethood. The pandemic is proving my point. We have not thought in terms of planethood. So we said, oh, China, they're dying in China. Well, that's their problem, another country. We have to change our way of thinking. We have to think in global terms, in planetary terms, in humane terms.
You took, with this conviction and with this motivation, you restarted the global community's commitment to international justice, and you went to help create the International Criminal Court. Can you tell us about that?
I said, first of all, we need a court. We need an independent international court, a permanent international court, so that everybody will know that if they commit this kind of crime, they will be held to account in a court of law. And so I worked on that. I wrote 2 volumes on that too, an international criminal court. And lo and behold, the court was created eventually with all the difficulties. And I was honored by the first trial. They asked me to come and make the closing remarks for the prosecution in their first case, which I did. I was then, I think, 92 years old.
Youngster.
Been working on it since I was 27. And so we had the court. We still have a long way to go.
Yes.
We have no enforcement. I wrote 2 volumes on enforcing, and that's your question now. How do you get it to do this? You cannot get this overnight. You cannot say you're a hero, great, go and protect our country. I regret that I have only one life to live, to give for my country. That makes you a national hero, makes you a goddamn fool, as far as I'm concerned. First of all, you only have one life, and you're going to give it up for what? For your country? Does that include all the crimes by your country? I'm as patriotic as the next man. I'm more patriotic than most. But patriotism to save lives, not to take lives. And we have forgotten that. And we have to resurrect that somehow. And we are getting there. The fact that we have a court after all these years was a great step forward. The fact that we have people writing books about this now and saying, hey, you have to be more humane in your relations with other countries. And we have people lecturing. And I'm swamped still with requests for lectures in universities. And the students, and I'm concerned about the life of the students, standing ovations, invariably, because they know that what I'm saying is true, that we have lost our humanity in the military. We talk about protecting the military. The best way to protect the military is to avoid war. not to see that they are still standing when thousands of others are dead and thousands of ours are also dead. That's not a victory. That's a defeat. It's a defeat of the human conscience. It's a defeat of human effort. And that's why I'm so pleased to know that you had an organization here, the Sousa Mendes Foundation, which recognized the nobility of a statesman who said, look, if they can get out of the country, we'll give them a passport, which will enable them to move on. And many people took advantage of that, were able to do that. Their lives were saved by virtue of their being able to flee away from the murderous country which Germany had become. And so I'm glad to be able to talk to them and for them.
And Ben, you were first in many human initiatives in pointing out to needs of redress. After the Einsatzgruppen trial, you were tasked with another first, which is creating a restitution regime for the victims.
Yes.
Can you tell us, since
Yeah.
the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma grew in part out of that? Would you please tell us more about it?
There is a general principle. The principle is if you do harm, you have an obligation to try to make good, to repair the harm or compensate the victim where you cannot repair it. That was a basic principle of law applied to all people at all times in all places. I wasn't inventing anything. I said we cannot have the survivors of this horrible mass murder and just turn our back and say, okay, go home. We have to set up a program which would compensate them and give them a chance to repair their injuries. Fortunately, Germany had a chancellor, devout Catholic, Konrad Adenauer, who recognized the morality of what I've described as the law. And he recognized that they had a German obligation to try to make amends. And that was the key, was after the war, of course. And we try to make that a reality. That was very difficult to do. First of all, you have to define what are the injuries you can compensate. We had discussions. I brought together a combination of the leading Jewish organizations, the American Joint Distribution Committee, the Jewish Agency for Israel, for Palestine it was then called. And how do we go about doing this? Well, do we ask anything for the death of the millions of people who were murdered? We discussed that, not for long, because we reached agreement fairly quickly. We said, look, we're not going to debate whether grandpa is worth more than grandma, or whether my cousin is worth less than my uncle. We take nothing for the loss of human life. I recall our discussions, and I'm still moved by it. We say, no, there's no way we can compensate for a life which we cannot restore. But for the other things, broken arms, diseases you captured, destruction of your capacity to earn a living, all kinds of things which insurance companies deal with, we could do that. But you're dealing with a country which is devastated. We had knocked the hell out of Germany. How do you expect them to now compensate a handful, but still significant number of survivors? And that was a problem. So we had to figure that out. And we did. On the last point, we decided, since German marks were worthless, the Dutch Reichsmark, you could be a millionaire in Reichsmark, you couldn't buy a pound of bread. They had a new currency. No one trusted the new currency. But the idea was accept goods instead of money. And there was a new state of Israel created to give refuge to the Nazi victims who were fleeing for their lives. And so Israel was barren. They needed housing. They needed all kinds of things. Taxis, for example, trains, locomotives, boats, ships, housing and all that. And they were all made in Germany instead of paying worthless German marks. Cigarettes became the currency. Carton of cigarettes, you could get whatever you wanted.
Very bad for everybody.
Yes, and so we devised the technique and also the law, which had to be complicated, very complicated, really. You know, how do you know a man is, for example, typical case, a man seems to be normal, he's liberated, hooray, he goes home, his family is all killed. If he flees to the United States or with help to some other country. And then somewhere along the line, something trips and he starts going back to the Nazis are chasing me. And he began, his mind again snaps. You were dealing with that kind of problem when you came to the United States. Then you saw the people, the delayed syndrome. And so this was another type of injury, a real personal injury.
Absolutely.
Much of it incurable anymore. And so how do we deal with all that? Well, I set up the machinery for that. And it was complicated and difficult. And we had to, I set up offices in different countries to help the victims. In Israel, I had an office in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem to help the victim. We had offices in Paris and London, the United States. Right. And we filed on behalf of the victims. So this was all part of the same historical evolution of how you dealt with a great human tragedy. And when people have to realize we have obligations to our fellow human beings, behave in a humane way. And that has to be taught at all new levels. Not to say it's glorious to die for your country. It's stupid to die for your country. You shouldn't have to die for your country. Make sure your country is safe at all times. This is a mentality which has not yet been reached. It's on the way. We do have courses in human rights being taught all around the world. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the United Nations. We have teaching the Harvard Divinity School, for example, which I've been a supporter of gladly, teaching in divinity schools the need for human beings to behave like human beings. And I hope this is the message which will come from whatever you do with these passing remarks. We see the progress. We have courts, we have judges, we have decisions. Not all of them are correct, not all of them are perfect, but it's the beginning. And when we see, as I do, I have reports coming in to me all the time for all the crimes being committed all around the world, still today. There are beginning efforts to try to control it, try to stop it. And it would be too much to expect in one generation to reach a perfect solution. All you can do is never give up. It's a slogan of mine. I have 3 points, very important. 1, never give up. 2, never give up. 3, never give up.
Give up.
And this is the problem. Never give up. We are getting there, but slow.
So beyond the never again, the triple never again, or 10 times never again, or never give up, never give up, never give up. What would you tell another 27-year-old or younger or older how not to give up?
I'll tell you how.
Yes.
I was born in Transylvania, a country that no longer exists. I was born in a little village. My parents were very poor. There was no employment. When I was 9 months old, I told my parents, let's get out of here. Not really, but they told me, let's get out of here, go to a land of promise. We came to America. We lived in a slum. My parents were janitors. I was selected to go to better schools at all levels, high school level, college level, law level, so on. I had no money. I had no money for lunch. I went to the divinity school and I said, look, I'm a Harvard Law student. I have no money. I'm hungry, lunchtime. Can you let me work for lunch? Can I come here and work for you? And they said, sure, you just come in toward the end of the meal, you'll help clean up, and whatever food is left, you can take. We throw it out in the garbage anyway. And so I had it made. I could collect enough of their garbage to live on for a week. So, and then I survived a terrible war, abused very much by the American army as well. They said, you're a Howard man, do the toilets again, wash them again, you can do better than that. And I think I disliked the American army as much as the German army. So war was hell for me too. Now, I ask myself, I've spent most of my life trying to get a more humane world for everybody. Based upon my wartime experiences, my other experiences, my legal experiences. And I know I cannot achieve it perfectly, but it has been, I've pointed to progress. And not only that, I'm amazed. I get medals, I get doctorate degrees, honorary degrees, I get invitations, much more than I can handle, to come and talk to their students. And I say to the students, and I say to your students, if this little kid from Pennsylvania, could do as much as he did in his lifetime, one lifetime, why can't you at least try? And I hope that inspires people. I know it does.
It does.
That is thanking me for the inspiration and pledging, to do something. Do as much as you can. I don't expect everybody to stop doing whatever they're doing in life and change their course, but do what you can when you can. Make people recognize they have a moral obligation as well as a legal obligation to treat all people kindly and respect their views, respect their color, respect their religion. That doesn't justify you're killing them or doing anything to stop them. You should help them instead of killing them. If you can teach that ethical principle, and I think your foundation is trying to do that, and many others as well.
Well, yeah.
We are moving toward a more humane world. And I thank you, and I'm glad to see you again. And I'm glad to see you still smiling and happy and still carrying on.
And do you have any question to me?
How do you keep so young?
The same way you do.
I have no time to get old.
Exactly.
Keep laughing. And I'm laughing. Nice having seen you.
Same here, darling. Mwah. I hope you enjoyed the film, the video as much as I did. In addition to the film is excellent, and maybe you can watch it wherever you can. Ben is not only my friend, as you see, he's a total inspiration. And when the discussions, he's the one who actually re-inspired the world to create the International Criminal Court, as was stated. And he has a huge bunch of admirers and friends who participated in the creation of the court. Another admirer and friend from that Justice Brigade, for lack of a better word, it's interesting that we can't find a peaceful word for a icon for a group of people who are trying to build something together. It's always a military meaning. And so when I asked another friend of the court, another friend of Ben's, another one of his admirers, and a colleague, dear colleague, Professor Jennifer Trahan, who is teaching at NYU's Center for Global Affairs and has also written extensively on International Criminal Court's crime of aggression, to answer with me your question and answers and discuss with me her thoughts and her feelings about Ben, about the issues that came up. Jennifer, please.
Great, thank you, Yael. It's such a tremendous honor to be part of this. And I'm just enjoying in the chat all these wonderful expressions of admiration from Ben, and they're truly appropriate. I'm really honored that my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Yael Danieli, and the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma asked me to join this event. I've known Ben only about 20 years, a lot less time than Yael, but I have known him through the negotiations on the International Criminal Court crime of aggression, which resulted in the crime being defined and prosecutable with some limitations before the International Criminal Court. And Ben was uniquely positioned to remind us why we needed this crime of aggression, because of course, if you've seen the film, you've seen how he witnessed the tremendous horrors in World War II. And I do remember there were times when the negotiations would get completely mired down over minutia, and out would come Ben, and Ben would say, do you know what we're trying to do? We're trying to restrain aggressive war making, trying to deter war, get over the minutia and progress in your negotiations. Ben has also been a tremendous inspiration to me because he is absolute living proof that one person does matter. One dedicated person such as Ben can achieve a tremendous amount. And the international community is truly indebted to Ben for his work. So I'm delighted to join with Yael to answer your questions.
So questions are starting to appear, and let's start with kind of a hot button one. Of course, Yael, you are from Israel. It's about Israel. So does Ben believe that Israel, Hamas, or the Palestinian Authority has committed war crimes, and is Israel subject to the ICC?
Yael, do you want to take this one, or shall I?
You can take the.
Okay. So I did also see the question, how does the ICC relate to Nuremberg? And, you know, what would Ben think about this situation? I think Ben would say the ICC is the legacy of Nuremberg. That was the tribunal that started this field of international justice. Then we had the Yugoslav Rwanda tribunals. And then was the idea we need a standing institution. It's doing a lot of cases, including Myanmar, Bangladesh, Mali, Uganda, DRC. It will now have a Darfur case. And one of the situations it is investigating is looking at crimes on both sides. It is investigating Israeli crimes and Palestinian crimes. It hasn't progressed to know exactly what the court might move forward on. But there was a question, is there jurisdiction over Israel? So Palestine has joined the International Criminal Court. So preliminarily, there appears to be jurisdiction over crimes committed in the territory of Palestine. This is all at a fairly early stage, so it is a little unclear exactly what the court would proceed on.
And Yael, I think this whole topic pains you deeply from what I understand.
Yes, it always does. And let's not forget that June 6th is not only D-Day, it's also the day of the Six-Day War.
So the next question is, are the refugees from Syria entitled to compensation? And if so, how?
Again, we will share the answer, Jennifer. The question whether victims are entitled to what is a question in every case before the court. As you'll hear from Jennifer, many people are extremely committed with the same kind of dedicated inspiration to ensure that that the court will attend to the Syrian issue, to the Syrian conflict. It's not even a conflict, it's a person against his own people, but I won't go there. What's important for you to get from this about victims' compensation is that the International Criminal Court is the first in the world to have the most progressive the most progressive regime of reparations for victims ever. And here, victims are not only entitled to reparations when the judgment decides so, but also victims' rights are fully met to protection, to participation, and to reparations. I had the personal honor to envision the Trust Fund for Victims of the court, still consider it my baby. And in fact, if the Syrian case comes before the court, I'm sure the issue of reparations in all of its complexity will be discussed. Jen, do you want to?
Yeah, I do need to add, because the situation is not before the court. So it's very hard to get jurisdiction over the crimes in Syria. So we like to think of the International Criminal Court as a global court, and I wish it were. Unfortunately, it's dependent on which countries join the court. The United States is not a party to the court, although you may have noticed last Friday's announcement that the US, at the end of the hostilities against the court that we saw in the Trump administration are definitely over, and the US will now have a constructive relationship. Syria is not a party to the court. There's no Syria tribunal. There desperately should be one. And when the situation there was an attempt to refer the situation by the UN Security Council to the International Criminal Court. It was blocked by Russian and Chinese vetoes. So they are partly responsible why the court can't do Syria cases. So yes, the victims are entitled to reparations. It's difficult to see. Only the future will tell. There are some cases proceeding in Europe. So there may be some victims who are able to get them there, but the vast bulk of the crimes, we don't really have a court yet that they can be clearly heard by. So they are entitled to reparations, but exactly how this can happen is quite unclear.
Now, Ben made a point of saying he's trying to end war making. So is he opposed to war of any kind? Is there any kind of a justified war in his opinion, or is absolutely no war justified?
Yeah, so I actually think Ben would probably oppose all war, absolutely all war. What under our UN system, there are 2 times that you have a justified war. And this is basically if the Security Council gives a force authorization. So there was an authorization for troops to go into Libya when Gaddafi said there will be rivers of blood and was cracking down on the opposition. So if the council authorizes it, or a war in self-defense. So that is the charter system. Unfortunately, it is not very well adhered to, which is why Ben and many others worked for so many years on really kind of creating enforcement behind the charter system. And that is the International Criminal Court crime of aggression. So that's the basic structure of when is a war justified. It's in the UN Charter. It's really only those two situations. And Ben would say we just need the Charter adhered to. And that's what he was trying to do through the International Criminal Court having jurisdiction over this crime. But unfortunately, it's not the jurisdiction that Ben and many of us would have wanted the court to have. It's a little bit too limited to really address what it should.
Let's see, more in the comment, we have a comment and a question. In World War I, 10% of the casualties were civilian, 90% military. The percentages are now flipped. Aggression against civilians, including women and children, are often part of the strategies of warring parties. Again, that's a comment, but if you want to respond to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a horrible tragedy of war. I mean, it's the oddity of the laws of war. You are allowed to target military targets, and military should never target civilians. But we all know in war, too many civilians die, and even many military who die needlessly. So even under the laws of war, there is a small window for civilian casualties around a military target. One calls that collateral damage. But the laws of war are so imperfectly adhered to. And that's why Ben took such a stance against aggressive war making, because wars are simply not fought cleanly. And often started without, I mentioned there are only two legitimate reasons under the charter system to go to war, and there are too many wars started that do not meet these criteria.
So the question is, would war against Hitler be justified? I mean, he was fighting in that war against Hitler. Certainly that was justified, or does he feel that wasn't justified?
Yes, no, war, in the context of World War II, absolutely. The United States, of course, was involved after Pearl Harbor, so that allows the US to exercise collective self-defense. There were many countries attacked and annexed in Europe. That all allows collective self-defense. So even though Ben would say war is an appalling evil, self-defense is allowed under the UN charter system, although of course World War II is pre-UN charter, but it would still hold true under the pre-charter rules.
Yeah, I would add that he actually said so very clearly in our interview. So, and he actually stated that the only war is the war to defend your country, or military should be there to defend a country, not to attack someone else. So he is actually extremely clear, and a person of such integrity. I miss him terribly here, although Jennifer is articulating it very, very well.
One of our audience members makes the point that the US was not attacked by Nazi Germany.
The US was attacked by the Japanese.
True.
There is also something called collective self-defense, so that a country can go in self-defense of another country. Now, again, this is post-World War II that it's absolutely formulated that way. But for instance, if UK asks for self-defense against Nazi aggression, the US would be able to do so. So even, yes, Pearl Harbor doesn't explain US intervention in the context of Europe, but the United States would be able to defend allies. It's called collective self-defense. So the idea is self-defense is a country can defend itself from attack, and collective self-defense would be like NATO countries acting together.
So another question is on the role of women's organizations in the founding of the International Criminal Court. Can one of you speak about that?
Yes, I would love to. There was a women's caucus for gender justice that was extremely important to not only the creation of ICC as a whole, but to push for women's rights, push for rape as a crime of war, crimes against humanity as well, and has throughout to this day been promoted by the prosecutor of the court. She assigned a special advisor on women's issues. They came out with amazing reports that are very relevant to women's issues. And some of the cases that came out in ICTY, ICTR before the ICC already created a conceptual space to build from about women's rights and the rights in general of vulnerable people, be it women, be it children, be it the elderly. Again, at some point, I had the honor of being chair of the committee that created the rules of procedure of evidence for them. So every question of yours brings a whole lot of wonderful memories.
Ben did have the foresight to recognize one of our current challenges is cyber attacks. And it was really Ben's inspiration. I'm on the Council of Advisors on the Rome Statute, that's the founding statute of the International Criminal Court, and cyber warfare. And Ben said, you know, what we need to look to in the future is we're going to be attacked by cyber means. And now there are a number of experts working on this and saying this actually can be prosecuted under the International Criminal Court. And of course, the goal of the International Criminal Court is not to prosecute crimes, but to try to deter them. So the idea is to let it be known that certain catastrophic cyber attacks could come in the court's jurisdiction. The goal is always to alter state behavior and try to limit the number of crimes. And I'll just, on sexual gender-based violence, echo it with Yael. I think, yes, the ICC had ground to make up because historically rape was simply seen as how war happens, and was really, there was absolutely insufficient attention. And we started having groundbreaking law from the Yugoslav and Rwanda tribunals. The Rwanda tribunal was the first one to say rape can be part of the genocide. And the Yugoslavia tribunal made groundbreaking pathways as well. And now the International Criminal Court is importantly continuing this. And then the idea of these tribunals is if states take their definitions of crimes and put them into domestic criminal codes, because these tribunals can't prosecute all the cases globally, maybe national jurisdictions can start using the crimes as well.
Now, before we get to final thoughts, I do want to tell you a little bit about next week's program. Next week is our final program of our spring season, and then we're going to be taking a break until the middle of July. Next week, we're showing a very important film. It's called The Rescuers. And it looks at diplomats, including Sousa Mendes, but not only him. It looks at diplomats in 12 different countries who saved lives during World War II. It looks at what motivated them. And it compares the situation of the Holocaust to more recent genocide. So we're going to play you the trailer for next week's film. After today's program, you will receive an email with information about how to sign up. Most of our programs are free, including today's program. Next week is not the case. We do, it is by tickets only, but tickets are by donation of any amount. We are a nonprofit organization, and your donation is 100% tax deductible. So here is the trailer for the film, The Rescuers.
Kigali has been the center of the fiercest fighting in the Civil War. The United Nations has been able to do very little to help these people.
As a Rwandan and an anti-genocide activist who lost many members of my family to genocide, I could not think of a better project to be part of than one that shows how all of us can make a difference.
My father was a young diplomat in 1943. My father was told to stop giving these passports and helping the Jewish community escape the island.
German planes.
My mother was thrown to the ground and she died the following Saturday.
Duckwitz, a member of the Nazi Party, had by his efforts organized the rescue of 7,200 people. An amazing feat of goodness from someone who had been trained in the art of evil.
I feel so peculiar standing here with you because you're alive.
It is terrible that so many people had to die, where 600,000 Jews lived before, and at the end of the war, 90,000 has left to live.
You don't connect these bureaucratic actions to the actual saving of a life.
Yeah, not when you see you, though.
What would you say to Frank Foley today if you met him?
Thank you for saving our lives. Thank you.
When you reflect on the diplomats, the phrase, the mystery of goodness, is it a mystery, or do you think goodness is actually a deep-seated human virtue which emerges?
I know there can be hope. I've learned that when we see crimes against humanity, we cannot turn the other way. Instead, we must transform our fears into courage to take action.
So now I would like to invite Dr. Yael Danieli to give us her final thoughts.
There was a suggestion in the chat to promote Ben's receiving the Medal of Honor, the Medal of Freedom, sorry. There is such an initiative, and I urge all of you who truly feel this to go ahead and write to the White House about that. I'm so happy to have been able to share this amazing human being with you. And I'm so happy that to do that, both for the Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma with the Susan Mendes Foundation. I think it's a perfect fit. I feel inspired. I feel looking forward for many other such collaborative initiatives that would indeed keep integrity and love of life and love of peace as their center of attention. I also want to make sure, just so some of you might be interested in getting to know the center a little bit more, that the center has not only been able to have gotten such wonderful people as Ben, as its supporters, but we also created, talking about reparations, the tools not only to determine reparations for victim survivors, but even for second and third generation, which I think might be of interest to many of you. Olivia, it's been a total pleasure to work with you. Why don't you show off in the back of you that beautiful painting that connects the two of us perfectly to my justice hat rather than justice psychology. I love that painting. And thank you for you.
So yes, we're all about promoting justice, human rights, and a life well lived. So may we all have such a life well lived. And so thank you, Dr. Danieli, for this brilliant interview. and for inviting Jennifer Trahan to join you in the Q&A. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you to all of you. We have a nice big crowd, which is wonderful. And see you all next week.